All right, so I think I'm gonna try and wrap things up together. So we talked a lot about EA and cognitive biases, forecasting, I think was the last week, together with some funky experimental philosophy stuff. Many domains in social psychology. We have not touched a lot of the classic domains in social psychology, because honestly, I try and not do too much of the literature that is not well validated, and also try to focus on the things that are impactful. But today I want to raise something that is related to morality, but also brings us closer to how we should think about science. And I have a lot of stories to share with you. Some of these stories involve you, or at least HKU students that sat here a year or two ago, that had a bit of impact on the scientific community. And we've learned a lot of things from that, from those case studies. So I'm going to start with some examples from the social psychology literature about unethical behavior. What is honesty? How do we think about honesty? How do we measure honesty? What kind of experiments we do about honesty? And then I'm going to bring this back to how do we think about science? How do we think about evidence? How do we decide that something is credible or not credible? And then finally, wrapping it all together about the need for open, credible science, not just in social psychology, but also in your careers, in industry, in effective altruism. Throughout, we need to know what works and what doesn't work. And we need to fight things like unethical behavior. All right, so just to make it clear, what is the difference between morality and unethical behavior? There's so much written about this, and I just want to clarify my perspective on this. It's not the only perspective. There are many perspectives on this, but I try and differentiate morality from unethical behavior. So when it comes to morality, we have a unifying system of guiding principles to define what constitutes right and wrong. So we can debate a specific case study. You might think that this is moral. I might think this is not moral. And then we can discuss what are the differences between that. But it's not clear what is right and wrong, and people can have different opinions about this. For example, a trolley dilemma. What should you do? So if you decide to pull the lever and switch the tracks, I will not hold you accountable saying you're completely wrong, go to prison. This is not how morality works. We need to accept the differences in morality, and we need to be able to discuss those. At some point, as a society, we decide to take moral principles, and then we make those into ethical guidelines. So unethicality is the intentions to engage attitudes towards an actual participation in behaviors that violate widely accepted rules, laws, and regulations. So when a society comes together, when a university comes together, when an organization comes together and says, we've debated these moral principles and we came to the conclusion that this is wrong. So if you want to be part of this society, if you want to stay in this university, if you want to be in the city, if you want to be part of this organization, then you have to follow these rules. Could be regulations, could be laws, could be all kinds of principles, but these are usually well communicated to everybody. If you are joining us, this is what you should do. If you violate these laws, if you violate these rules, then you will pay for it. And these are the punishments, right? So as a society, one of the first things that you need to do as an organization, society, is to define these rules. What is completely unacceptable to you? So unethical behavior tends to be the extreme cases of morality where something horrible, awful is happening, and we want to prevent this. So it's not tolerable for us for this to exist in our context. So I gave you already this interesting cartoon that I like to show because it really highlights all the differences, but how we judge one another, but then we can coexist together in society to some extent. At least when we travel, or here in Hong Kong, you can have both of these almost side by side. And then unethical behavior is something that we say we completely don't accept this kind of thing. So I don't know how it works with students, but one of the first things that when I came to HKU is I had to attend a session by the ICAC where they said no red envelopes. You can't accept anything from students. not even like a coffee invitation. You need to disclose everything that you get from any corporation. So all sorts of things that I cannot do as a professor coming into HKU. On one side, we have the Hong Kong government, ICAC, and on the other side, we have the ethical rules of the Hong Kong University. So of course, every time I conduct research, I need to apply for the ethics, the IRB, and I need to say how my research is in accordance to the rules of HKU, which are, of course, part of a larger world organization that tries to coordinate how to treat humans, animals when we conduct research. So it's very clear that you're not supposed to accept money, favor, in order to give grades or to do research, favoring, I don't know, soft drink company or smoking cigarettes, that kind of thing. So this is how I differentiate between these two, but many people have different interpretations of this. So there are many different approaches to how you study unethical behavior. First, just to ask you, like your gut intuition, what are some of the challenges of studying unethical behavior? What could be more problematic about studying unethical behavior compared to anything else in social psychology? How do we study unethical behavior? Sorry? Yeah, somebody has to do something unethical, yeah. And then we want to know about it. Yeah, so what are some of the challenges with this?
It's like if you want to study someone robbing people,
Mm-hmm.
how are you gonna do that? Are you gonna like that much watch someone?
Yeah. Right. So yeah, let's try and kind of articulate what the challenge is. So let's say I am Batman and I want to see whether robbers are robbing and doing, criminals there. How do I find those? I want to interview those as Batman, sit down together and have a chat about why they're doing this. Yeah, so what are some of the challenges? Let's just say it. I think we all understand that there's something here that's preventing us from doing research. Robbers don't want to sit down and have a chat, right? They have a very specific goal, and the goal is to get away with whatever it is that's unethical that they're trying to do. So I think robbers, it's not a problem of misunderstanding. It's like Batman catches them and they're like, oh, it's wrong to rob a bank. Okay, I didn't know. So there's no misunderstandings. I think it's very clear. You have guards, you have security, you need to overcome those. And finally, you know that Batman is out there waiting for you. So you realize that you're doing something very wrong. So you try and hide this. So how to study a behavior that people are trying to hide? So one approach that we have, and this is this approach of behavioral ethics teams. So Dan Ariely, which we talked about in many other contexts about morality, him and a group of people started a domain that is called behavioral ethics, and really revolutionized the whole field. We'll talk about some of these people, but up until 10, 20 years ago, we had only one very specific way of studying unethical behavior, at least in social psychology. And this group, Dan Ariely as the prominent member of this group, tried to articulate that actually we can experimentally manipulate things like that in the lab. So they come out with some pretty amazing techniques of how we can get people to act unethically, even when supposedly people are trying to hide this kind of behavior. So he wrote a book, and I recommend this book. It's not completely updated because it's from more than 10 years ago, but highly recommended because it includes a lot of the revolutionary things that they brought to the world of social psychology. The honest truth about dishonesty, and how we lie to everyone, especially ourselves. So we had some pretty straightforward views of why people lie, cheat, steal. And then this book had some really interesting insights based on their work. More recently, this movie. So if you don't like watching, if you don't like reading a book or listening to a book, this is a good alternative. Actually, saw this in a film festival when I was living in the Netherlands. To my surprise, there was a movie about this. And they did this movie as a Kickstarter. So if you don't have enough money to do a movie, you can go on Kickstarter. Many people don't know Dana already and contributed to this. And from the Kickstarter came out this movie that summarizes the book and a lot of evidence. Plus, and this is amazing, interviewing a lot of people who acted unethically and are willing to confess the process that they've been through. So they sit down and talk to them and summarize them and compare this to the research that they've done. So terrific stuff. I strongly recommend this. So I'll just show you some of the techniques that was traditionally used in social psychology. Yeah. So I'll ask you to go on the Mentimeter. And so we used to have scales like this. This is how we used to do questions. So please rate the likelihood of engaging in the following behaviors. From 0, never, to 10, very likely. And then about yourself, which I think you know pretty well, and then some estimation of what is the average Hong Kong University student. So we have many kinds of behaviors. We have lying to your parents about school performance, you and the average Hong Kong students, exaggerating accomplishments on an application, using false excuse to delay taking an exam or turning in an assignment, receiving substantial help on an assignment when the instructor asks for individual work. So I'll give you a few moments to think about this. And as you're answering this, try and make some predictions about what kind of patterns you'll see in this data. Also think about the reliability of this data. What can we do with this data? What kind of insights can we draw from this data? What can we do with this kind of methodology? What is this methodology good for? What do we do when we run these kinds of surveys? What are we aiming at? If you want to see the results, let's see the results maybe. That will help us gain some insights. All right. So now that you also have the results, tell me what you see. By now, you're very good experimenters. You know how to put the scientist hat on. What do you see? Sorry? Overestimate? How do you know that this is an overestimation? Uh-huh. Yeah, it could be that this classroom is much better than the average HKU, right? We could have like a good collection of people here that are more honest, but generally there seems to be a misalignment, at the very least, between how we rate ourselves on average in this classroom and how we on average rate the average HKU student, right? What are some of the reflections that you have on this insight? What do you gain from this? We think that we're better. We think that we're more honest and ethical than others. Yeah, good. So we can, at the very least, just like we studied other cognitive biases, we studied better than average effect, right? We studied overconfidence. So all these kinds of things apply also to honesty. So it seems like the way that we think of ourselves is being slightly lower than average when it comes to dishonesty. So thinking of ourselves as being more honest, right? What seems to be like the most interesting question here for you? What kind of behaviors are you the most interested in? What stands out to you? What do you think HKU is the most interested in fighting? What seems to be like the strongest unethical behavior? False excuse. Why is that the most unethical, the strongest unethicality?
legitimate reason to taking these down when it's turned in signing, but if they use a form to kind of the university like put down on that, which people actually.
Okay, so there's others that are harmed because of your actions. So some people have legit excuse or reason not to be there, might be harmed by you faking this. Any other opinions about this? Sorry?
The fourth one, like receiving potential help on
Yeah. Why this one? Good. Why this one?
like for the last for behavior is like even though they know that you may be using a false excuse, but they won't ban it because others may have legitimate reasons. But if you are receiving substantial help, basically no one can tell whether or not you are.
Okay.
You cannot detect.
Good. What other differences are there between these two choices? What other things are? So I like this short debate because it highlights some of the differences between behavior. How do we measure unethicality? How do we know whether something is unethical or not? Try and think about this from the effective altruism kind of perspective. Yes?
It harms other things.
Yeah. So he also said harms others. He also pointed out to harming others. But what is the differences between who is harmed or the level of harm?
It comes down to whether or not it is detectable. Things like
Whether it's detectable is perhaps one of the factors. What other factors can we have? So let's say some people might steal a bubble gum in 7-Eleven, right? Not very detectable. I don't think there's a lot that we can do about this, but do we care? To what extent do we care? Perhaps if this is a very prevalent kind of behavior, then we care more compared to other kind of stealing. Somebody comes in and takes the computer here or takes something from the university, costs more money, more people affected. Who is affected? A corporation, an individual. But how do we measure unethicality? So a little bit like with effective altruism, it's like how many people are involved, who is harmed, to what extent are they harmed, what is the long-term impact of the offense, right? How many people are involved in creating this harm? Did you do this by yourself or are there other people involved? So there are lots of things about this one that make it very substantial, the last one, the fourth one, that make it very sensitive for HKU that we care about, especially in an academic environment, right? So if you make an excuse about not coming to a test or postponing, something, there are some implications about this, but it usually, definitely other people are affected by but perhaps a little bit more detectable. The harm is not as extensive, but when it comes to academic work that is submitted, that is not your own, or all kinds of other, substantial help on assignments. So faking credit, saying that you did something when you didn't. This has larger implications for the entire society, but it's interesting to try and quantify this. So one of the exercises that we might do is sit down and debate which ones, and then try to quantify and put some numbers behind this. But definitely when we run this, the main insight that we want to gain from comparison between yourself and the average HKU student is this misalignment that seems to hold in, I ran this many times. This pattern always shows up, showing that we tend to think of ourselves as more honest than others. Yeah. Here's another one. Your honesty. How many times have you lied in the last month? And on a scale of 0 to 10, how honest would you rate yourself on, total? Let's try and think about this. And then an invitation for you to reflect on why do people cheat? What's your take? It's an open-ended, so if you want, you can reflect on this. So before I show you the results of this one, we're a very small sample, but I'll tell you what the general results are for the population. What do you think we'll see here? Okay, so a negative relationship between these two because we tend to associate the number of lies with the level of honesty, right? How many people would put a 0 on number of lies in the first question? Just take a guess. Like, how many people usually say 0? Well, let's say this way. When somebody puts a 0, what does that indicate? Say it. What does this indicate? Okay. Why would you say that they're lying? You don't know them. You've never met them. What's a tiny lie compared to a big lie?
Wait, it's so like, if your mom asks you, did you eat breakfast yet? And you're like, and you didn't eat breakfast yet, you don't want to get mad or something. You're like, yeah, no, I didn't eat breakfast yet. I ate breakfast yet. Like, it's like that.
Yeah, but why would people lie about something like that? Yeah, so we have all sorts of things that we do when we lie that we're not out to harm somebody else, but rather we're trying to protect them or protect us in our interaction with them. We want to make them feel better or make us feel better when we're with them, right? In order to keep harmony together. Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. So we have all kinds of options, and we're a little bit of a debate on why people might put 0. Another thing, if we try to think of people as generally good, honest people, we could say maybe they lied, but they don't remember because we try, we put this. It's not a big deal. We forgot about this already. It's not something that's major. So we can think of all sorts of reasons why people put 0, but it's interesting to try and see the relationship between these two. So generally, we think of ourselves as honest people, like higher than 5, but then we're not on 0. We have at least 4 in the last month. Now, 4 in the last month, is that convincing to you? You said like 0 is impossible. Is 4 a month? Is that seems like a good number? No? Too good to be true or too bad? Seems accurate. Yeah. Why is this 4 and not more than 4?
But you have breakfast every day.
You see your mom very often, right? You see your friends very often. Yeah. Maybe 4 is what we can remember. So retrievability issues. So you can already think about all sorts of issues with asking people in this kind of question. A lot of limitation with this question. And even when we have an answer, we don't know what to do with it. Right? It's very difficult to interpret these kinds of things. Why do people cheat? What's your take? Because everybody is doing it, so it's stupid not to cheat. That's interesting. On an assignment exam, pressure from the external environment internally to get a good grade. But also realizing they don't have enough time to prepare enough for it. On a person, not a romance specialist. Okay. Interesting reflection. Thanks for that. So I'll show you the Dan Ariely take on this.
How many people here have lied at least once since the beginning of 2014? How many people here think of yourself in general as honest, wonderful people? The same group. How can it be? How can it be that at the same time we think of ourselves as honest and then we recognize that we're dishonest? It turns out it's all about rationalization. On one hand, we want to look at the mirror and think that we're good, honest, wonderful people. On the other hand, we want to benefit selfishly from being dishonest. As long as we cheat just a little bit, we don't have to pay any price in terms of the image and the way we view ourselves. And we call this the fudge factor. So this is the ability to misbehave and think of ourselves as good people. And you can think about all kinds of ways in which in your own life you have a fudge factor. The speed limit. Maybe it says 55, but are you okay in driving 60? What about cheating a little bit on taxes? What about exaggerating their online dating profile? Across many studies, we find that everything that changes the fudge factor also changes people's ability to be dishonest. There are dozens of elements that can change the magnitude of the fudge factor, and we've been able to observe many of them in the lab. For example, if you can say to yourself, everybody is doing it, it's easier for you to rationalize to yourself that this is actually an okay thing to do and cheat to a higher degree.
Yeah, so this is from the movie. This is just a little part of that. So it's interesting because everybody is doing it. That's like the first thing that Dan Ariely is talking about with the fudge factor, right? So the fudge factor is quite interesting. So you have, I'm not hurting anybody. So by lying or by taking a bubble gum from 7-Eleven, who's gonna like notice? Who's gonna know about this? Creativity, I'm just being creative. I found a way around the system. HQ is trying to put some barriers, but then I'm more clever than HQ or the professor or the TA. Therefore, I'm just expressing my creativity. If HQ is not investing in finding and detecting my fraud, then it's their problem. They left a hole there. Might as well just use, that gap. Social norms. So everybody in HQ are doing this. I heard that my friend does this. Somebody told me last year. I saw that others are doing this. Sometimes it's a matter of fatigue, so I was so tired of this exam. I was so tired of this task. I just decided to take the short way out of this. And then he talks about all sorts of other things like distance from the crime and self deception. Now, the revolutionary thing about the approach by Dan Ariely is that before the behavioral ethics team came out and started to do experiments on this, we thought that generally we have good people and we have bad people. And I think, the Batman and superhero kind of dichotomy between the ones that are good, the ones that are bad, captures that, or at least gets us to think about this. One of the things that I like about Batman, for example, is just he shows that even superheroes, can be regular people and also have weaknesses and also come from all sorts of traumatic backgrounds that affect their lives. Dan Ariely says most of us are in between. So maybe we have 1% that always cheat, that are bad people, that cannot be fixed. There will always be that. Maybe we have 1% that always are honest, always do the good thing, never lie, and all that. But the 98% is all of us. We're somewhere in the middle. And under certain circumstances, we do lie, we do cheat, we do unethical behaviors, giving all kinds of factors. Fudge factor is one of those. And the book and that kind of literature tries to aim to understand, why do people do that? Under what circumstances do we do that? How can we help them to do better? How can we build a system where all of us are more inclined to be the good, honest people rather than the people who do crime and do unethical behavior? Rationalization seems to be a big factor in this that drives this honesty. So we tend to rationalize. So when we do something bad, we can't live with the conflict of having done something bad, but wanting to think of ourselves as good, honest social animals, justifying ourselves to our moms, to our society. Psychological distance, our willingness to cheat increases when we gain psychological distance from the action. Pencils are okay, but money is not. So let's say you're at the workplace, you will not go to, the secretary or somebody who's holding the funds at HKU and take money away from them. But if HKU is giving you pencils to use at your workplace, it's okay to also take the pencils home and give this to your kids and your spouse. So that is not considered to be unethical behavior. This is considered to be part of the system. So people realize this, they're a bit more distant. The pencils do not seem like money. And also, if we can rationalize that we're cheating or dishonest for other people, even if it's to keep mom happy or to, give the grades that we promised our parents, then it's okay. I'm not doing this because I want the better grades. I'm doing this because I want them to feel better. Or we need money in my family because, otherwise the family is going to struggle. So we rationalize this in all sorts of different way. One other thing that he talks about in the book is that one dishonest thing leads to another. So most of the people don't start like one day they wake up and say, let's rob a bank, or let's steal loads of money, or let's create like a big violation. Usually it starts with something small and something a bit bigger and something a bit bigger. And I also find this to be true for cases with student fraud. So many cases that I've seen, if you interview the students, it's not something that immediately they did something completely dishonest, but something built up to this. A lot of pressure, small steps along the way. I just want to say, every time I discuss HKU student behavior, I'm not just talking about HKU students. I will also give you example of academics who do fraud, but I'm trying to make this relevant for you. So it's not a judgment of students in specific. I'm just saying people build up. It's like a snowball. It becomes bigger and bigger every time, with small steps, rationalizing things every time. Okay, so now that we've seen this kind of measure, what are the disadvantages, and how can we improve on these self-report measures? How can we measure unethical behavior in a way that goes beyond the self-report measures? What kind of, let's say I want to study this in the lab and I want to see whether you are unethical. What kind of things can I do in order to measure that? Hidden cameras, very good. What do you need aside from hidden cameras? So hidden cameras, okay, they're hidden, you don't know that they're there. What else do you need? You want them to act unethically. What else? You might wait a very long time until somebody acts unethically if they're in a study, right? Yeah, please. What kind of simulation? Yeah. Yeah. Terrific. Do you have something like an example in mind how to do that? Okay. Yeah, good. This is what we're aiming at. We want to create a situation. So we have hidden cameras, so they don't know that they're being observed. That's already one deception. But then we're a little bit worried about whether they're going to act unethically or not. We want to be able to give them the opportunity to act unethically, right? So what could be in the context that would lead them to do that? Why would people act unethically if they're in a lab setting? What kind of judgment decision-making scenario paradigm can we use? Sorry? Acting unethically? Present them with an unethical person? What do you mean? Yeah, benefits them. In what way? How can we make sure that it benefits them? Yeah, you could get more money, like $1 US or whatever, how many US dollars, but then tell them, no, very suspicious. Nobody's watching you. Yeah, you can get that dollar, right? And then hoping that this will incentivize them in order to act unethically, right? Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so put them in a moral dilemma where both options are bad, either bad for you or bad for others, something like that. Yeah, yeah, good. So I'll show you the creativity of the behavioral ethics team and how they came up with this. I'll show you two videos of this is also from the movie, where they have a lot more of these things if you're curious about how to do these experiments.
Anywhere with a packet and a pen in front of it.
We gave people 20 simple math problems.
find the two numbers that add up to 10.
These are problems that everybody could solve if they had enough time, but we don't give people enough time.
I just, as I'm showing you this, I want you to think about what do these experiments do? And when people answer or do certain things in these experiments, what does that mean, okay?
We are going to give you 5 minutes to solve as many as possible.
At the end of the 5 minutes, please stop, put your pencil down and count how many questions you got correctly. And now that you know how many questions you got correctly, take the sheet of paper, go to the front of the room and shred it. People do that, they come to the front, they say they solved 6 problems, pay them $6, they go home.
Very good, thank you for participating.
What the people in the experiment don't know is that we played with the shredder. The shredder shred the size of the page, but the body of the page remains intact. And what do we find? On average, people solve 4 problems and report to be solving 6.
I solved 6.
I don't know if this is embarrassing or not, but I got 6.
I believe I got 7 right.
40,000 people, 70% cheated. All right, what did you observe? What are your insights from this? A little bit similar to what you said, right? Is that what you had in mind, more or less? Okay, yeah. What's the most curious thing about this? What's the one thing, like when I saw this, read these studies, I'm like, I don't understand something very fundamental here, right? What kind of unethical behavior is taking place here? Cheating how? How do they measure cheating?
The participants were asked to report how many questions they got correct.
Mhm.
They reported a higher number than the actual result.
Yeah, so if we want to measure the extent to which they were cheating, what do we do?
Just to see, perhaps I guess also how big the difference is.
How big the difference is?
Yeah, the report.
Right. And on average, what seems to be the difference between what they reported? 2, right? They did 4, but they report 6. What's curious about this? They had 20 math questions, right? Why not just say 20? Reasonable. Why? Because 20 may be more raise suspicion, right? Okay, so it seems like 2 might be less detectable, less suspicion. Yeah. Any other? Right. So this brings us back to the rationalization. So maybe if I had a little bit more time, then I would be able to solve 2 more, right? So I was just on the verge of this. What else could be going on here? Yeah, so what does that reflect? By strangers in the same room as them, or by the experimenters, right? Something like that, afraid of being judged. Okay, good. Okay. But there is something very curious about this, because if you've already decided to cheat, might as well go, although as long as you're not detectable, or whether you care about other people or not. But seems reasonable that you get 10. Why not 10? Why not 12? What is it about the 4 and the 6? And at least the way that Dan Ariely talks about this is our ability to explain, rationalize this, and report more while still thinking about ourselves as good, honest people. So it could be about rationalizing, we almost solve it, so we're on the verge of this, or I initially chose that one, but then last minute I changed to this one, so I actually deserve that one because I got it right the first time, right? Or it could be something like, they're not paying me enough for this experiment. I took the bus, it took me half an hour more. I deserve these $2, but I don't want to exaggerate because I just want what I'm already deserved, right? So people come up with all sorts of of examples for why this is, which just shows you that more than 70% cheat, but they don't cheat all the way to 20, from 4 to 20, they cheat just a little bit. Here's the second one.
Good morning. We want to talk a little bit about dishonesty. To measure dishonesty, we do all kinds of things. One type of experiment, we use a die. We give people a 6-sided die, and we say, why don't you roll the die, and we'll pay you whatever it comes up on. It comes on 6, we'll give you $6, $5, and so on. But you can get paid based on the top side or the bottom side. You decide, but don't tell us. You roll the die, and let's say it came with 5 on the bottom and 2 on the top. And now I say, and what did you pick?
Bottom.
Okay. If you picked bottom, you say bottom, no problem. But if you pick top, what do? Do you say the truth, top, and get only $2? Or do you change your mind and say bottom and get $5? And when you do it 20 times, you find that people are incredibly lucky. But today we have 2 versions of this experiment. We have one version that at most you can make today $4. We have another version that at most you can make $40. Why don't you toss a coin and we'll see which one you got? People toss a coin, and no matter what happened, we say, oh, sorry, you got the $4 version. But then the research assistant looks around, he says, listen, my boss is not here today. So I'll tell you what, you got $3 to show up to the experiment. If you will give me these $3, I'll pretend you got the other coin flip. So the research assistant is asking him for a bribe. What percentage bribed him? 90%. 90% bribed. They just moved from a $4 version to a $40 version. They were going to get much more money. What happened to cheating? More or less the same? More cheating. And not only did they cheated more, they started stealing. What do I mean by that? People have this sheet. I chose 5 and 2, I chose 5 and so on. So they sum up how many points they have, and let's say we owe them $23. And we say, here's an envelope with $50. Why don't you pay yourself the amount of money you deserve? The amount of money you don't deserve, leave in the envelope, and as you leave the room, there's a big box with all kinds of envelopes, drop it there. In this corruption experiment, it was the first time we saw stealing. People also wrote 23 and took more money. So when we think about culture, there's a really worrisome thought. Think about lots of people who behave honestly and some people who don't. And what happens if those people establish the social norm? And what if those people are in a position of power? When you get into a system and something in the system tells you that things are wrong there, all of a sudden you abandon your own moral fiber. This is about the fact that if the person running the system is telling us that corruption or dishonesty or something is allowed, our understanding of what is acceptable changes instantly.
So I think it's a bit of a combination between the suggestions that we had. So we had the monetary incentives, and then we had the control of the context of how to create a situation where people feel like they might more likely to behave unethically, also involving another person. Sometimes it's signaling from another person saying, no, I'm thinking of acting unethically. If you take part in this, you have something to benefit from that. So it combines some of the things that you intuitively thought about. And it's interesting to see how they do this, how they measure this. Okay. So we have quite a lot of interesting studies on this. So this is Psychological Bulletin, one of our most reputable journals that usually publishes reviews and meta-analyses. And you can see that they've summarized all the different kinds of experiments. So Dana already talked about the matrix, solving 20 math questions. That's one of the methods. Die roll. Tell us what it is that you got. Sometimes the die roll is that you roll the die within a box that only you can see what it is that you got, and you need to report this. So this is a die roll. Many of the people that I know that do behavioral ethics use the die roll. We also have a coin flip and sender receiver, where there's a little bit of a communication. Would you collaborate with me? To what extent? And you can see generally the rate of liars. So the rate of liars is not 0, not even close to 0. It goes somewhere between 50, 30, ups and downs, and the different methods are slightly better at detecting this. So if we want to measure unethical behavior, we want to know to what extent these measures are able to give enough opportunity for people to feel like they want to act unethically, and then to what extent. So this is the degree of lying, and this is the just being more than 0, the rate of liars. So you can see over here the rates of lying, to what extent. So matrix doesn't perform as well as perhaps some of the other measures. So if you think that this is interesting for you and you want to do research on this, and you want to understand this a bit more, it's always good to go to one of these recent meta-analysis that summarizes this entire literature. Many studies included in this, and then see some of the insights. Who do you think cheats more? Americans, Hong Kong locals, or Israelis?
Forward TV. The world is thinking.
So in the cheating stuff, people think that there's going to be cultural differences. So we tried this. So I grew up in Israel, and I tried to see whether the Israelis cheat more than Americans. Actually, before I tell you about this, how many people here kind of grew up in different countries? Okay, how many of you think that in your original country people cheat more than Americans? Raise your hand. Almost everybody. It's really interesting. Aside from the Canadians, I find that everybody feel that their country of origin cheats more. So we tried this. We tried Israel. Turns out the Israelis cheat just like the Americans. My Italian collaborator was certain. She was willing to bet money that the Italians would cheat more than the Americans. They cheat just the same. My Chinese collaborator was sure that the Chinese would cheat more than Americans. They cheat just the same. We're trying more countries.
And what is your exact experiment for testing this?
Yeah, I'll tell you in a second. So the exact experiment, the exact experiment is we give people a sheet of paper, and we say, solve these problems, we'll pay you $1 per question. And for some people, we say, when you finish, shred the piece of paper and just tell us how many questions you solved correctly.
One more thing I want to ask you to reflect on, which I forgot to do. One more question before I show you what he's going to talk about. Who do you think cheats more, bankers or politicians? We should add academics in there as well. Okay, so think about this. Go back to Dan already.
So now you have an opportunity to exaggerate, and we actually know how many questions you solved, so we can check how much people cheating. We did find one cultural difference. And the cultural difference is we went to Washington, D.C., we set up the experiment in bars where congressional staffers hang out in, and then we went to New York City and we created the same experiment in bars where bankers hang out in. Now let's consult your intuition. Who do you think cheats more? Who votes for bankers? Who votes for politicians? Yeah. So that was my intuition, but the bankers cheat about 2 to 1. But I should say one thing, which is these were congressional staffers, so they're junior politicians, right? They haven't. More research is needed.
The way that they explain this in the literature is that it's just opportunity-wise, politicians have higher visibility. I think Donald Trump just changed everything about that. But generally, politicians have higher visibility and held more accountable, but bankers have more opportunity. So they deal with money directly. So it's much easier for them to actually play with things. Meta-analysis here about all kinds of differences. I'm just curious about your intuitions. What are your intuitions? Politicians, yeah. So it's interesting that we really think about politicians as being more unethical than bankers, but it seems like bankers are upheld more. One thing that students usually ask me about, so I added this slide, is what happens with males and females. So it does seem like males are higher on cheating. It could be about opportunity, it could be about cultural norms, it could be about all sorts of different things. What's also interesting is that in the cheating studies, we have a lot in the lab and we have a lot in the field. So you can see fairly consistent So it's not just that if you measure this in the lab, people are not going to behave in real life, but there seems to be some kind of correlation, but definitely in the field, the rates are lower. But looking at field studies that have something like close to 50% cheating is very, very disturbing. So something that we need to take into account. Just to summarize this first session, unethicality differs among people. It's not that we have 50% like this, 50% like this. We have the 98% that given certain opportunity will act. So it also depends on the context, different kinds of behaviors that we can think about. There's all sorts of ways to measure this. We have self-reports, we have hidden cameras and observation, and we have all these kinds of experiments where we use deception in order to see whether others are trying to deceive us. So a lot of ways for us to measure this. Okay, so this is where things are going to get a little bit tricky. And I am curious what you would think about this, because this took the whole field by storm in the last year. And to some extent, we were also involved in this. So affected me. I spent a lot of time thinking about this. So this has to do with a certain finding that I'm going to let Dana Ariely talk about. So this is some of Dana Ariely's actual research about unethical behavior. I want you to pay attention to the way that he describes this and the solution that he offers in order to get people to behave more ethically. Here we go.
Now, how would you test a personal fudge factor? Initially, we said, what can we do to shrink the fudge factor? So we got people to the lab and we said, we have 2 tasks for you today. First, we asked half the people to recall either 10 books they read in high school or to recall the 10 commandments. And then we tempted them with cheating. Turns out the people who tried to recall the 10 commandments, and in our sample nobody could recall the 10 commandments, but those people who tried to recall the 10 commandments, given the opportunity to cheat, did not cheat at all. It wasn't that the more religious people, the people who remembered more of the commandment, cheated less, and the less religious people, the people who couldn't remember almost any commandment, cheated more. The moment people thought about trying to recall the 10 commandments, they stopped cheating. In fact, even when we give self-declared atheists the task of swearing on the Bible and we give them a chance to cheat, they don't cheat at all. Now, 10 commandments is something that is hard to bring into the education system, so we said, why don't we get people to sign the honor code? So we got people to sign. I understand that this short survey falls under the MIT honor code. Then they shredded it, no cheating whatsoever. And this is particularly interesting because MIT doesn't have an honor code. So all this was about decreasing the fudge factor. What about increasing the fudge factor?
Okay, let's not increase any fudge factors right now. What are your thoughts about this kind of moral reminders? If we remind people to be honest, if we give them an opportunity to sign moral code or recall the 10 commandments or think about the 10 commandments, then they would cheat less. How does that sound to you as a solution for us at HKU to decrease dishonest behavior? You're doing this? Why?
It's true, then if psychic rationalization really justifies what is motive right, and whatever means you try to stop lying by promoting the cycle of honesty, just promote. Okay.
Yeah, so you're not convinced by this, but what to say about the evidence and the experiments that they ran at MIT?
Like, it contradicts my prediction.
Yeah, contradicts your predictions. So how do you resolve these contradictions?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Good. Any other thoughts?
I think this could kind of work, despite the fact that, like, people would do this thing where they maybe have other kinds of reminders, for example, to practice kindness, gratitude, or positivity.
Yeah.
And that kind of, I guess, priming really does help. So yeah, in the same way, like I understand the logic why it could work.
Okay. So it seems like something in this finding is convincing, at least to some of us, yeah, where we see some examples around us in society where we get some reminders to act ethically or to act better. So be kind, stand, help others, don't cross the red light. I don't know, all kinds of kind of reminders. There's nothing stopping us, but there's something that gives us like a signal that tells us do not proceed or proceed with caution or be very careful. So perhaps will not work for all of us, but will work for some of us. This was very convincing to almost everybody, definitely when I was doing my PhD. So this study came out 2008. I started my PhD 2009. So this was already like a prominent finding, and I think it appears in most of the book, and it's called like self-concept maintenance theory. The slides are from actually HKU students that prepared this for, I think, the class in 2018. And it was called The Dishonesty of Honest People, a theory of self-concept maintenance. So Mazar, Amir, and Ariely in 2008 been cited 1,600 times and had all kinds of implications and really affected the way that we did things. So we just thought we need to get people to sign. We need to remind people of morality. The more that we remind them of morality, the less they're going to be unethical. There was something very compelling about this whole thing. So starting from 10 commandments, this is kind of like the experiment that they ran. So between subject design, 10 commandments versus 10 books that are not moral codes, and then seeing 6 different experiments, and very convincingly showed with religious reminders, commitment, tokens with money, all kinds of moderators, and so forth. Yeah. Thing is, we conducted a registered replication report on this study. You can see that the original results had a sample of about 56 in each commandment, where you had the 10 commandments or just books, with the mean difference being, minus 1.45. So it seems like something as slight as reminders of moral code really had a very large impact on the behavior. When we got other labs to do this from the open science community, some of them are specialists of unethical behavior and have been doing research on this for a very long time. We can see that all of these overlapped with the null. And when we have the meta-analytic effect down there at the end, it overlaps with the null, and the effect seems to be very, very small. So the bottom line from this is that even though Nina Mazar, Dana Ariely, and Ona Mir participated in this and vetted the protocol, the bottom line is that we failed to replicate this. Now, it's always interesting to see what happens when there's a failure to replicate a finding. Some authors are very hostile and do not agree, and then there's a whole discussion. This was one of the earlier attempts to replicate a study that deals with unethicality. And it's interesting to see the response by them. Although they vetted the protocol, they had a lot of reasons that they came up with as to why this did not replicate, which back then seemed like a very reasonable thing to do. So they said, when we worked on the protocol, we realized that there were more challenges than one would think. So a lot of the things we didn't keep a record of. This was from 2008, so we had to come up with. So it could be that things deviated. And then we think that this should have been adjusted because maybe people heard about this already. So now 10 commandments don't work as much. We need to use something else. So maybe do conceptual rather than direct replications. And finally, they said, unfortunately, the rules of the current grand replication attempt were stricter and did not allow for such flexibility that could generate a conceptual replication, at least within each individual lab replication attempt. So they had a lot of reasons for this, but the bottom line is that we are humbled and thankful and hope to continue learning from the results. And generally, I think, especially compared to some other authors that responded to this, this was a fairly positive way of dealing with this criticism, saying, we appreciate the effort, thank you for that, but we have some reasons where we think that if you could have done something differently, this would have worked. This is a very famous statistician that is part of the open science community. And he didn't really like this response. And he says, another way of putting it is, Ariely's book is called The Honest Truth. I assume Ariely was honest when writing this book. That is, he was expressing sincerely held views, but honesty and even transparency are not enough. Honesty and transparency supply the conditions under which we can do good science, but we still need to perform good measurements and good consistent effects. The above discussed study failed in that part because of the old problem that we're using a between subject design instead of a within subject design here and here. So he had a lot of criticism on this and say, if you're talking about unethicality, you should be held to a higher standard and you should be more open to criticisms like that. I'll show you another case study also related to this team. And given what I just showed you and what we studied in the first session, you tell me what you think about this as well.
We went to UCLA and we asked about 500 students to try and recall the 10 Commandments. By the way, none of them could. This was interesting by itself. They made up all kind of new commandments. But after just trying to remember the 10 Commandments, we gave them the same task in which they could cheat. What happened? Nobody cheated. Now, it wasn't as if the people who remembered many commandments didn't cheat and the people who remembered few commandments cheated. Nobody cheated. That basically suggests that once you get people to consider their own moral code, we basically kind of reduce the flexibility by which we could justify all kinds of moral behavior. We ran a similar experiment, by the way, with a big insurance company. The only thing we did was we changed the line on the signature. You know, usually in insurance form, you fill the insurance form and you sign at the bottom. By the time people sign at the bottom, they finish cheating. It's over, right? So we changed the line and we got people to sign up front. Turns out people cheat much less when they first sign.
So a very interesting experiment, a field experiment with an insurance company where they randomized into one of two conditions. Do you sign at the end? So after you already wrote the report and maybe cheated, at the end you write, you know, this is my signature. Or do you have the moral reminder up at the beginning of the form? First, write down, sign that you're going to report this honestly, and then maybe it will increase your honesty. So they ran this and found support for this in one of the experiments using the same kind of methodology. Yeah, so this is the paper. So you can see Dana Ariely and some very famous names from the behavioral ethics team. So you've got Max Bazerman, you've got Lisa Shu, Francesca Gino is a big name that publishes a lot in this domain from Harvard. And what they found is that we found that signing before rather than after the opportunity to cheat makes ethics salient when they are needed most and significantly reduces dishonesty. And this was really very convincing because they both did this with the puzzles, the matrix math, the math puzzles that they had, like I showed you with the shredding the paper. But they also did this with a field experiment. So this is experiment 3, published in PNAS. You can see here the reports of how they did this. And what was interesting is that the difference was almost 2,500 miles per car. That is, asking customers to sign at the beginning of the form led to a 10% increase in implied miles driven over the current practice of asking signature at the end. And based on this, this was very convincing to a lot of people, especially 10%. 10% is a lot. If you decrease cheating by 10%, that is something that is worthwhile implementing. And this was included in a lot of policy behaviors. I think the Obama administration implemented this. So you sign at the beginning. People changed the tax forms based on that. This is a summary by Dana Ariely, Francesca Gino, saying, you know, the first principle, reminding, emphasizes the effectiveness of subtle cues that increase the salience of morality and decrease people's ability to justify dishonesty, because they know at the beginning that they've committed to acting ethically. Yeah, so this was implemented in policy recommendations for tax compliance, and this was compliance with handicap parking. So they gave some examples of where this was implemented. It really seems like the world listened to social psychologists. Social psychologists said that this is how you reduce dishonesty, so we should implement this. Now, what is interesting is that in last year, in the same journal in PNAS, and this is the first time that I ever saw PNAS publish a replication, The same team, so you can see Max Bazerman, Francesca Gino, Lisa Shu, Nina Mazar, and Dan Ariely, did their own replication. So they conducted a replication of their own work from 10 years before that. So their first paper is 2012, and this is from 2021. And this is what they reported. Since this finding was published, various government agencies have adopted this practice. However, in this project, we failed to replicate this result. Across 5 conceptual replications, 4,500 people, one highly powered previous replication of more than 1,000 people conducted with the authors of the original paper, we observed no effect of signing first on honest reporting. Given the policy applications of this result, it is important to update the scientific record regarding the veracity of these results. When I saw this come out, what do you think my reaction was, aside from this? Wow. I was very happy because I really think that high-profile people like Dan Ariely should do more replications. I've been going around for a very long time in our department saying, can we do more replications? Can we do more replications? And nobody wants to do replications. It's not valued. For the first time after this came out, when I was walking in the halls of HKU, people were like, did you see that PNAS published a replication? Did you see that Francesca Gino, Max Bazerman, and Dan Ariely published a replication? I thought, it's amazing. The transformation has succeeded. Open science is there. Everybody's practicing. Hallelujah. We've arrived at a paradise, scientific paradise, where we can get PNAS to publish a replication of this whole thing. I don't think that if I would have submitted this to PNAS, it would have been accepted, but it's nice to see that these prominent people are able to update the knowledge, and I really was hoping that a lot more people would do that. What to do about all the policy recommendations, what to do about all the TED Talks that are there, it's a big question. I don't know how to address that, but overall, aside from the wow, I think very positive. Here's the conclusion. So you can see the wrap-up of the mini meta-analysis of the 6 studies that they ran, and you can see that the effect is very close to 0, definitely overlaps with the 0, and they ran this with the anagram, die rolling, matrix, whatever you want. And the conclusion was a false positive finding. Therefore, we can conclude from this data that there is no good evidence for the existence of this effect. Big win for science. I think it's just astounding. More than that, when I read Max Bazerman's book that came out 2 years ago during the pandemic, I was hiking, listening to this, and I was very positively surprised that he was actually updating the knowledge. And he said that in this initial paper I was signing first, my co-authors and I found that if people promise to tell the truth before filling out the form that is the top of the form rather than the bottom, then they fill out form far more honestly than if they sign it after. And then, making matters worse, we recently failed to replicate this result, reducing my confidence in the conclusion of the paper. So he reflects on this, and I was very glad to see that he was saying his general message is aim for better, not perfect. I'm going to go over this. But one of the things that they did in this replication is that, according to the best practices of open science, they shared all of their data and the code, not only for the replication, but they also shared the data in the code for the experiments from 2012. And then a few weeks later, this came out. And this was an earthquake in the academic community, because Data Colada, which is a group of open science supportive people in marketing who are very well known, they came out with the paper False Positive Psychology in 2011, showed without any doubt that the insurance company data is fraud. It's fake. Somebody faked this. And they gave a lot of reasons for that. So you can go and you can read this many, many pages of one by one taking this whole thing down. So for example, one of the things that they say, the distribution of the miles reported, this is if you look at how people usually report their miles, it's like a normal distribution. But if you look at the evidence that they provided in their experiment 3 in the insurance company, people just like reported this almost the same for each one. And then suddenly it drops after 50,000 miles. So there's like a big problem here. It doesn't reflect what we would expect from reported miles. In addition, usually people round up, so people don't report, miles, in ending with 1, ending with 2, ending with 3. They usually report something ending with 0. So if it's somewhere between 0 and 10, they just round it up to the close by 0. So typically, when we look at the way that people fill up these forms, they fill this up with a lot of rounding. Not all of them, but most of the biggest one are rounding. But when we look at the data, that in the insurance company, in the time two, there was no rounding. So something has shifted here. Something is very, very wrong. Yeah, last 3 digits, last digit is the baseline. This is another one. But I think the most clear evidence for this is that when they opened the Excel sheet, looking at the data, they saw that there were different fonts for the data. So somebody changed the numbers, but used a different font. So they weren't even doing this very cleverly. So they just compared the evidence for the Cambria and the Calibri, sign, top sign, and it's very clear that somebody just like moved things in order for the effect to come out. So amazing. So a study about honesty has something in it that reflects very clear fraud of trying to get this effect to show up, even though it's not really there. Before I show you what happened because of this, what are your reactions? What do you think about this? I was looking to hear what they would have to say about this. So Lisa Shu posted on Twitter, famous paper synonymous with my name, Shu et al. 2012, published in PNAS, is being retracted due to evidence of fraudulent data. I should be appalled. Instead, I'm delighted by this piece of investigative data journalism from the brilliant Data Colada team. So now she takes us on this long journey of how she explains what exactly happened. And then she says that this happened because of a collaboration. So she did some studies, and then Mazar and Ariely did the insurance company, and then they decided to join this together as a paper in PNAS. So she had nothing to do with the insurance company. Dan Ariely came with that data. And then she says, did we request to scrutinize each other's data sets? At that time, no. Did Shu, Gino, Beiserman ever see or touch the Ariely-Mazar field experiment data? No. We began our collaborations from a place of assumed trust rather than earned trust. Lesson learned. What is she doing? I was the first author, but it's not my responsibility. So Ariely and Mazar need to be held accountable for this. And honestly, when I collaborate with students, I'm sometimes very worried about this, because even though we have a lot of checks and balances, and I am the one that very transparently collect the data and open everything up, I always worry because I don't see everything that is going on. So that's why we have 2 teams working independently, and then external peer reviewers, and then we have OpenSign and all of that. But this is what's typical in science. You can talk to some of the PhD students and ask how they collaborate with their mentors. Some of our mentors don't know what their students are doing. Fast forward a few years, when research from team composed by Crystal Williams Beiserman tried to use signing first as a way to promote honesty, they failed to replicate the results. And in the process, the lead authors of the 2020 paper noted a randomization problem failure in the field experiment. So already there were some signs that there were issues, even when before Data Colada came out with their finding. But finally, at the end of a very long thread, they said, science is an evolving conversation. We must continually test and retest to confirm or disprove what we think we know and find the limits of what we don't know. So generally, I thought that this was also a good process. So the reason why we have open science is that we want to make sure that things are solid. If we would have made this open in 2012, maybe we wouldn't have to wait 9 years for us to find that this is fraudulent data. And finally, there's the retraction. So the original paper was retracted. So win-win for science. So this is my general summary. As an open science advocate, I think this is a case study of why we need open science. We really need to open up everything. We need to make sure that we have as many eyes on things as possible. And I think generally, it's amazing that the original authors did a replication. Even, you know, it was failed, it was published, and in PNAS, which is a very reputable journal, they shared everything that they had, not only from the replication, but also the original. Like, there's a big question. Why would you share something if you did fraud? You know, they didn't have to share the original from 2012. They shared this. So what does this mean? Immediately, people are like, who did this? Did Dan Ariely did this? Did the insurance company did this? Who did this? Who should we blame? But I think before we start blaming people, we just should talk about what is the right process. And the right process is transparency. We need as much open science as possible. We need many replications. Why would you wait 9 years for you to do a replication? Before you go to policy, before Obama implements all kinds of changes in papers, just run a replication and see whether this holds or not. We could have saved 9 years and a lot of money based on this. And the good thing is that generally the original authors accepted responsibility and retracted the original, and the checkers, data collada, were held and acknowledged for their contribution. And this is where it gets really interesting, because I was dragged into this. Why was I dragged into this? Because when this was published was 2 weeks after something that HKU students did was published. So you can see over here, the people started to write things. So this is an Israeli newspaper, because Dan Ariely is Israeli, and contacted by blah, blah, PNAS said, we are aware of the findings and so on. 2 weeks earlier, Retraction Watch published an article pointing to issues with another Ariely experiment from 2004. Gilad Feldman, that's me, University of Hong Kong, wanted to replicate the original study, which looked into the relationship between this and that, and they found some statistical errors. So I didn't find the statistical errors. HKU students found the statistical errors, and actually we ran the replication, and we ran 2 different replications of the Ariely and Heyman and Ariely 2004, and both of the replications were successful. So quite amazing, very well done, good job by the students. But when we did the replication, we found some errors. So when we sent the article with the HKU students to the journal, which rejected us, desk rejected us, actually the editor said, but you found errors, that's amazing, I'm going to talk to Dan Ariely. And this is what happened. So this is our paper just published this year in Collabra. And you can see all the students and the teaching assistant that are in there. So we conducted the 2 studies, and we found support for the main claim. However, the rewards monetary. So we needed to reframe something from the original studies, but generally it was concluded as 2 successful replications. And I was very upset with this desk rejection. I didn't understand why psychological science would reject us when they're accepting something like in a PNAS. So this is not even PNAS, this is psychological science. So we got desk rejected, but the editor took responsibility and talked to Dan Ariely. And finally, the editor and Dan Ariely issued something called an expression of concern. So they said, you know, there's some problems. We used stat check. The reported yielded 13 errors. And then finally, at the end, acknowledging all of the team, the HKU students, in an official expression of concern, which I thought was interesting. But then because of the issue with the fraud, people are like, but look, he also had problems with the expression of concern 2 weeks before that. So perhaps these 2 things are together. So suddenly, even my parents, because it's Israel, so even my parents got like a request for interviews about all the problematic Ariely. But for me, it's not problematic. He was very enthusiastic about this, emailed us, thanked us, said it's amazing work by the students. This is from Retraction Watch, a team of students. And then, you know, how this was happening. And then what I wrote is, students and early career researchers are the key to the credibility revolution. They are our most underappreciated, underutilized stakeholder. So all the credit to the students. I did not find this by myself. The students did this. And Dan Ariely responded, this is the way that science should progress. And in a very supportive email, he was very positive about this. So I was very discouraged by how people linked between these 2, because I think overall, the behavior of Dan Ariely and the people in this team was very pro-open science and very open to getting criticism and updating this. I was also a little bit upset about these errors that the student found. After we issued these errors, I actually realized that this was public knowledge by an AI that scanned all the scientific literature and ran stat check. So there's something that you can call this like a grammar check for statistics. So stat check went over a lot of the published literature, including the Dan Ariely, Heyman and Ariely 2004 that we identified as. And already in, when was this? 2016, so 5 years before that, that bot automatically posted a warning about this paper in PubPeer, where you write criticisms or write updates about whether something is off, or academic discussions about papers. So this was already posted, but psychological science did not check PubPeer. They did not run stat check on old articles. So I don't know why they waited for us to submit this kind of replication. They also, of course, wanted the replication to be published there, even though we published this in some other place. So generally, I also thought this was a big win for open science, again, because an independent team, this case HKU students, conducted a reproduction and replication. We found errors, and then we conducted a replication that was successful. The errors were communicated to the journal, and then the corresponding author and the journal editor went with this and published this. So finally, we got the successful replications published in Collabora. So big win for everybody. But this was not the reaction by the community. People went down hard on everybody, especially on Dan Ariely. At some point, I felt very sorry for the way that the open science community engages in this kind of thing. And I think it was especially sensitive because Dan Ariely and this team talk about unethical behavior. So a lot of people perhaps have felt judged by this team, saying, you're telling all of us that we act unethically, you should uphold yourself to higher standards. And it was very sad to witness this. So if before, when the PNAS replication came out, people at HKU in the halls were telling me, did you see that replication? Now we're going to start replications. Replications are published in PNAS. Replications are done by Dan Ariely, Francesca Gino. Suddenly, you go around the halls and people are like, did you see what happened to Dan Ariely? We are never going to share anything ever again. God knows what's in there. I don't know what my students did. I don't know where the insurance company that I got my data from. And for me, I felt so sad by this. Because if anything, this is proof for us that we have to open everything up. And if this happens in science, and this happens with people that study unethical behavior, you can imagine what happens, even for-profit, charities, whatever is out there. There's no other way to combat this kind of thing aside from transparency and getting as many people to work on this as possible. So before the whole fraud case, people said, this is amazing. If they shared, I will share. They do replication, I'll replicate. But after, everybody's like, I'll never share. And to me, this is a very sad reflection of our field. And for me, it's just exactly the opposite. I'm just like, I never want to have to face this kind of situation again. And I'm going to do everything that I can in order to open everything up, because I don't want in 20 years, the paper that we identified issues was 2004. It took like 2 decades. I don't want in 2 decades to realize that what I've done my research on has errors or is problematic. So for me, it's like open everything, validate everything as early as possible, welcome and incentivize community to help, and really embrace mistakes. It's completely okay to be to have mistakes. If there is fraud, of course, do an investigation and see who did this, but don't start immediately blaming everybody. First, it's good that now we know that the data was fraudulent. Then we need to find out how this happened and fight this. But generally, this is for me a big case study of open science, which is why I did with HKU students, I did a lot of assessments. At the beginning, we did assessments of other teams. So the first assessments that we did in 2019 were of other people's work. And people said, why are you doing this for other people? Did you do this on your own? And then I said, yeah, this is a good point. So starting from 2020, the last 2 years, we did this on our own replications. So you can see the reports. You can click on this and see how every year we investigated the replications that they did the year before that. So not only do we have 2 teams working independently in peer reviewing and then external reviewers, and then we include an early career researcher to take the lead, and then we share everything on the open science framework, but we also do every year, we're doing assessments of the previous year, and it's really working. And then finally, I decided, because of the Dana Ariely, I decided I'm very worried about this, and I'm going to incentivize finding errors in my work. So now I offer $5 if you find a minor error in my work, or $50 if you find a major error in my work. And last year, people who participated in my classes were paid with this, and they really found mistake. So this is what I had to pay at the end. And you can see the payoff over there. And then I gave them the option of either getting this money or donating this to charity, to GiveWell, Maximum Impact Fund, and then I will match it. So for every dollar that they give, I will give $1. And finally, they decided to donate this. So together we donated $250 to GiveWell. So we were able to identify errors. So even after everything that we did, there were errors and we found them. So I was very thrilled about this. We learned a lot. GiveWell and the world benefited from this. Science benefited from this. So I think this is the way forward. Check me, replicate me, I think, is the way to do this. Yeah, so this is the donation to GiveWell. And I really think that one of the first principles, and now I have this in my guided thesis lab guide, where I ask people to really be open to the possibility of having mistakes. So mistakes are expected, respected, inspected, corrected. So don't be shy if you've made a mistake. We should be proud of our mistakes if we're working to correct them. So not finding a mistake or hiding a mistake is something that we should, be careful with and should be ashamed of. But mistakes are definitely, science is messy, and we should do more and more in order to check. So this is from my lab manual. And now I include things like open science. It's okay to make mistakes. It's part of the process. We're all human. Yeah, we need to facilitate a process that will achieve high probability of finding this. So I really try and make this as open as possible to those who work with me in order to catch errors like this and do a more ethical environment where things are to be expected. Here's another person in the open science community that works on finding errors in other people's work. And here on Twitter, he says that, people, when he was trying to find a job, people did not like this kind of person. And I can tell you that some of the reactions at HKU psychology department to what it is that I do are not completely positive, especially by some of the senior people. It's a bit controversial. People don't like this kind of, what are you training your students to, haunt us? I'm not. First of all, I want to make sure that I'm okay. I think that these kinds of people, and like what the students did, is what we need in our departments. For some reason, we don't hire these people, but we need more people to uphold us to higher standards. There's a whole team that's trying to make this more common in science. We're trying to contribute to this as much as possible with some pledges, but it really seems to be like a trend. Elizabeth Bick is remarkable in her ability to identify fraud in images in scientific literature. And we're not talking about psychology, we're talking about biology. So she quit academia. She wasn't able to find a professor job, but many people like me support her on Patreon. We give, so by now there's a few hundred people that give money, and this is her monthly salary. And so now she does this full-time job, and she helps find fraud in scientific journals. And I really like organizations like GiveWell that give money, pay for people to attack their methodology, find mistakes in their data. I think we should all do this more. So any organization that does this, any scientist that does this, I tend to hold them, see them as more credible organizations or people. And I hope that this is where we're going in academia overall. So just to wrap everything up and connect the first session to the second session, I wanted us to see another domain in social psychology, how people measure unethicality. How do we think about ethicality, starting from cognitive biases to, how this impacts our society? What is it that we should take away from this? But all that has implications for science. All that has implications for effective altruism. Whatever it is that you're going to do after graduation, there are implications for transparency, for open science. So open science, I think, is the best way forward in order for us to address issues of unethicality. So at least when it comes to finding evidence, improving our society, I really believe in transparency as the best the best practice. We should do less of moral reminders and more about just getting a community to understand that it's good to share, it's good to open up, and it's good to own up to our mistakes and improve based on that.